Dexter Murphy had always seen things that weren't there, or rather, things that nobody else seemed to notice were there. As a child, his parents had dragged him to 3 different optometrists and a neurologist, all of whom declared his vision perfect and his brain activity normal. Eventually, they'd all settled on calling it a visual processing quirk and moved on with their lives. Now, at 28, with thick-rimmed glasses he didn't need and a half-finished PhD in astronomy, Dexter had learned to keep his observations to himself, especially the ones about the shimmering, translucent creatures that occasionally drifted through the night sky, warping the starlight behind them. "Pass me that data set, would you?" Professor Olivia Tanner held out her hand without looking up from her computer. The university observatory hummed with the quiet efficiency of expensive equipment and sleep-deprived academics. "Here you go," Dexter said, sliding over a thumb drive. "But I'm telling you, there's something weird about that section of the Horsehead Nebula. The light pattern shifts don't match any known gas behavior." Olivia sighed the sigh of a tenured professor dealing with a promising but exasperating student. "Dexter, we've been over this. Anomalous readings from a single telescope observation aren't evidence of, what was it you called them again?" "Space jellyfish," Dexter mumbled, immediately regretting his word choice. "Right. Space jellyfish." She pushed her steel-grey hair behind her ears and fixed him with the stare that had sent undergrads running from her Astrophysics 101 class. "You need to be careful about seeing patterns where none exist. That's how careers get derailed." What Dexter couldn't explain was that he'd been seeing these things since he was 6 years old, tracing shapes in the night sky with his first telescope. How they seemed to pulse and drift, occasionally clustering around certain celestial bodies like curious children. How sometimes, just sometimes, they seemed to notice him noticing them, and would quickly drift out of his field of vision. "I know how it sounds," he said, running a hand through his perpetually disheveled brown hair, "but the spectrometry data shows nothing conclusive." Olivia finished for him. "Look, I'm not dismissing you entirely. That's why I approved your extra observation time. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." Dexter completed the sentence along with her. It was practically her catchphrase at this point. "Dientes." The observatory door swung open, letting in a blast of cold night air and an exceedingly nervous-looking undergraduate assistant. "Professor Tanner, Dr. Reyes sent me to get you both. They're saying there's some kind of situation at the White House with visitors." "Visitors?" Olivia frowned. "What kind of visitors warrant interrupting our observation schedule?" The assistant swallowed hard. "The kind from another planet, apparently. It's all over the news. They're asking for astronomers and xenobiologists to consult." Olivia's eyebrows shot up so fast they nearly left her forehead. Dexter felt his heart rate double instantly. "Well," Olivia said after a moment of stunned silence, "I guess we should go see what all the fuss is about." As they hurriedly powered down equipment and gathered their things, Dexter glanced one last time through the telescope eyepiece. There, hovering near what appeared to be an ordinary patch of space, was one of his jellyfish, larger than he'd ever seen before, pulsing with an agitated rhythm. And for the first time in his life, he was absolutely certain it was staring back at him. The White House lawn had been transformed into what Dexter could only describe as the world's most high-stakes red carpet event. News helicopters circled overhead, military personnel formed a perimeter tight enough to choke a gnat, and a collection of Earth's most prominent scientists, politicians, and celebrities stood awkwardly in their Sunday best, pretending they weren't all about to pee themselves with excitement or terror. "This is unprecedented," Olivia muttered as they were ushered through security checkpoints. "Just confirmed extraterrestrial contact. We're witnessing history, Dexter." "Yeah," Dexter replied, but his attention was elsewhere, because hovering about 50 feet above the pristine lawn was the largest concentration of his jellyfish he'd ever seen. They swirled and pulsed in agitated patterns, their translucent bodies catching sunlight in ways that shouldn't be possible. And they seemed to be waiting for something. The answer came 10 minutes later, when the sky darkened unnaturally and a ship descended. It wasn't the flying saucer of B-movies or the sleek starfighter of modern sci-fi. It looked more like a geometric puzzle that had gotten drunk and forgotten how three-dimensional space was supposed to work. That's not conforming to any known aerodynamic principles, Olivia whispered, her academic skepticism momentarily forgotten in the face of blatant possibility. The angles are wrong, Dexter agreed, but what fascinated him more was how the jellyfish entities were now swarming around the craft, almost like an honor guard. A hatch that hadn't visibly existed a moment before opened in the side of the vessel. Two figures emerged. The first was tall and insectoid, with 4 arms and an exoskeleton that shimmered between green and purple depending on how the light hit it. The second was shorter, rounder, and covered in what appeared to be fine silver fur. "Greetings, people of Earth," the taller alien said, its mandibles clicking in perfect synchronization with surprisingly good English. "I am Ambassador Krelnik of the Galactic Confederation. This is my assistant, Moop." The furry alien made a gesture that might have been a wave or possibly a rude gesture in its culture. "We come in peace, seeking diplomatic relations with your promising young species," Krelnik continued. What nobody else seemed to notice was that directly above Krelnik's head floated the largest jellyfish entity Dexter had ever seen. It was the size of a small car, glowing with internal light, and clearly watching the proceedings with what Dexter somehow knew was amusement. The president stepped forward to deliver Earth's official response, a speech that had probably gone through 47 drafts in the last hour. Dexter wasn't listening. He was watching as the giant jellyfish thing extended a tendril down to touch Krelnik's head. Each time it did, the ambassador's antennae twitched slightly. "They're receiving instructions," Dexter whispered, not realizing he'd spoken aloud until Olivia elbowed him sharply. "Shh! This isn't the time for your imagination," she hissed. But Dexter couldn't stay quiet, because now there were more jellyfish, dozens of them, surrounding the diplomatic party. Some were touching the heads of various human officials. Others seemed to be taking measurements of the crowd, and one of them was floating directly toward Dexter. It happened during the formal introduction of the scientific delegation. Professor Olivia Tanner was mid-handshake, or whatever the appropriate term was when one party had pincer-like appendages, shaked with Krelnik when Dexter found himself face-to-face with a hovering, translucent entity that nobody else could see. The jellyfish, for lack of a better term, examined him with what seemed like curiosity. A tendril extended toward his forehead. "Ho there, floaty thing," Dexter said, instinctively stepping back. "Personal space, please." The entire gathering went silent. Ambassador Krelnik froze mid-gesture. Assistant Moop made a sound like a deflating balloon. Dexter realized everyone was staring at him. The jellyfish entities had all gone absolutely still. Said Dexter. "Did I say that out loud?" Krelnik's compound eyes fixed on Dexter with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "You," the ambassador said, mandibles clicking rapidly, "what did you just see?" And that's when the diplomatic incident really began. Dexter found himself whisked away from the White House lawn with an efficiency that suggested someone had been practicing the how to disappear an embarrassing civilian drill for 2 years. He was now sitting in what appeared to be a hastily repurposed conference room, facing an impromptu panel consisting of the Secretary of Defense, 2 stone-faced military officers, a clearly agitated Olivia, and most unnervingly Ambassador Krelnik and Moop. The jellyfish entities hovered anxiously around the aliens, their movements becoming increasingly erratic. "Let me get this straight," said General Harmon, a square-jawed man who looked like he ate nails for breakfast. "You can see things floating around our visitors?" "Yes," Dexter said, trying not to stare at the particularly large entity that was now doing what looked like panicked somersaults above Krelnik's head. "They're like translucent jellyfish, but they move with purpose. I've been seeing them my whole life, but there are way more of them around your delegation." Ambassador Krelnik's mandibles clicked rapidly in what Dexter was beginning to recognize as agitation. The alien turned to Moop and made a series of chittering sounds that the translation technology didn't catch. Moop responded with a series of high-pitched squeaks that sounded alarmingly like a hamster having an existential crisis. "Is there a problem?" asked the Secretary of Defense. whose expression suggested she was one weird alien behavior away from ordering a nuclear strike. Krelnik straightened all four of his arms in what seemed like a gesture of composure. "There is no cause for alarm. We simply need to consult with our delegation." The ambassador and Moop excused themselves, walking stiffly to the far corner of the room where they engaged in furious whispered conversation. What fascinated Dexter was how the jellyfish entities followed them, clustering in a tight formation that reminded him of a football huddle. "Dexter," Olivia hissed, leaning in close. "What the hell were you thinking? We're in the middle of the most important first contact in human history, and you start talking about floaty things." "I'm sorry," Dexter whispered back. "But they're right there, and one of them tried to touch me." The military officers exchanged glances that clearly communicated, "Great. The fate of Earth rests on the sanity of a hallucinating grad student." After several minutes of intense alien discussion, Krelnik and Moop returned to the table. The ambassador's compound eyes fixed on Dexter with unnerving intensity. "Mr. Murphy," Krelnik said, "could you describe these entities in more detail?" Dexter swallowed hard. "They're semi-transparent, with bodies that seem to change shape. They emit a faint light, especially when they're agitated like now. They've been around Earth for as long as I can remember, but they're much more numerous and active around you and your ship." Moop made a sound like a leaking tire. "And these entities," Krelnik continued, "mandibles perfectly still now, do they appear to interact with us or influence our actions in any way?" Dexter hesitated, then decided that diplomacy had already gone out the window. "Honestly? Yes, I just saw one touch your head with a tendril thing right before you announced the Galactic Confederation's peaceful intentions. Your antennae twitched each time it happened." The room went deadly silent. The jellyfish entities above the aliens began swirling in what looked distinctly like panic. Krelnik turned to the human officials. "We request a private discussion with Mr. Murphy. Alone." "Absolutely not," General Harmon said immediately. "I'm afraid we must insist," Krelnik replied, his tone suddenly cold. "This is now a matter of the highest galactic security. If you wish for diplomatic relations to continue, you will grant us this courtesy." The Secretary of Defense and the General entered into a hushed conversation. Olivia shot Dexter a look that clearly said, "If you get us all killed, I'm flunking you posthumously." Finally, the Secretary nodded. 10 minutes, no more. And we'll be right outside." As the human officials filed out, Dexter found himself alone with two increasingly distressed aliens and at least a dozen agitated cosmic jellyfish. "So," Dexter said, trying to sound casual, "I'm guessing those floaty things aren't supposed to be visible?" Krelnik's compound eyes narrowed. "Mr. Murphy, what you are seeing are what we call the observers, and the fact that you can see them changes everything." "The observers," Dexter repeated, watching as one of the jellyfish entities did what looked like a nervous loop-de-loop above Moop's head. "That's what you call them?" "They are the guiding ones." Moop spoke for the first time in accented but understandable English. His voice was surprisingly melodious for a creature that looked like a silver-furred basketball with limbs. "The divine supervisors. The celestial architects." "They're your gods," Dexter translated, his eyes widening with understanding. Krelnik's mandibles clicked in what might have been the alien equivalent of a wince. "That is a crude oversimplification, but not entirely inaccurate. They have guided our civilization since our species first gained sentience. They are the reason for the Galactic Confederation's existence." "And nobody's supposed to see them," Dexter guessed. "Nobody has ever seen them," Moop corrected, his fur bristling with agitation. "In 10,000 years of recorded history across 17 sentient species, there has never been a documented case of direct visual perception of the observers." As if on cue, the largest jellyfish observer in the room drifted directly in front of Dexter. It was at least 6 feet in diameter, its translucent body pulsing with patterns of light that seemed almost like writing. A tendril extended toward Dexter's forehead. This time, Dexter didn't flinch away. "I think it wants to communicate. Do not permit physical contact." Krelnick said sharply, taking a step forward. Too late. The tendril touched Dexter's skin, and the world exploded into color and sensation. Images and concepts flooded his mind, vast networks of stars and galaxies, the rise and fall of countless civilizations, the delicate balance of cosmic forces. Dexter saw the observers guiding the evolution of intelligent life throughout the universe, nudging species toward cooperation rather than extinction. He saw the Galactic Confederation forming under their subtle influence, bringing peace to 1,000 worlds. He saw the observers' bewilderment upon discovering Earth, a planet where their influence was somehow limited, where humans developed with minimal guidance. And then he saw their curiosity about him, a human who could perceive them, despite all universal constants, suggesting this should be impossible. The contact broke, leaving Dexter gasping for air. Holy shit, he wheezed, struggling to process what he'd just experienced. They'd been cosmic shepherds for millions of years. They'd been trying to guide us too, but something about humans makes it harder. Krelnick and Moop exchanged alarmed glances. It communicated with you? Moop asked, his voice rising to a squeak. Before Dexter could answer, the door burst open. General Harmon and the Secretary of Defense entered, followed by a new group of aliens. These newcomers were tall, spindly creatures with elongated heads and robes adorned with intricate geometric patterns. What's going on? Demanded the Secretary. We just received an emergency transmission from the alien ship. Something about a Priority 1 theological crisis? They've sent the high ecclesiasts, Krelnick said quietly, his compound eyes fixed on the robed aliens. This is far worse than I anticipated. The lead ecclesiast stepped forward, its three-fingered hands raised in a gesture that might have been religious or threatening. It was hard to tell. Is this the human who claims to perceive the unseen? The ecclesiast asked, its voice carrying a harmonic quality that made Dexter's teeth vibrate. Around the robed aliens, the observers were going absolutely berserk, swirling and pulsing with increasing agitation. The one that had communicated with Dexter positioned itself directly between him and the ecclesiasts. I don't just claim to see them, Dexter said, finding unexpected confidence. I've been seeing them my whole life, and now I know what they are. The lead ecclesiast made a sound like a pipe organ being kicked. Blasphemy. The divine guidance is beyond mortal perception. This human must be examined for spiritual contamination. Examined? General Harmon stepped forward, hand instinctively moving toward where his sidearm would normally be. Nobody's examining any American citizen without proper protocol. The ecclesiast's elongated head swiveled toward the general. This is beyond your understanding. The cosmic balance is at stake. As the tension in the room escalated, Dexter noticed something odd. The observer that had communicated with him was now forming what looked like letters in its luminous body, English letters. Warn them, it spelled out in pulsing light, danger. Danger. Dexter cleared his throat. Everyone? I think we have a bigger problem than my blasphemous eyeballs. He pointed at the empty air where the observer floated, visible only to him. They're trying to warn us about something, and I don't think we're going to like what it is. Within 24 hours, the news that a human could see alien gods had spread across every communication channel on Earth and, apparently, throughout a significant portion of the galaxy. The White House lawn had transformed from a carefully controlled diplomatic venue into what can only be described as an interstellar theological convention. Dexter, who had never enjoyed being the center of attention, even at departmental mixers, now found himself at the epicenter of the biggest religious crisis since, well, ever. This is unprecedented, said Dr. Eleanor Reyes, Earth's hastily appointed head of xenotheological relations, as she paced the secure conference room. We've got delegations from 16 different alien species demanding to see you. The Zurilians are threatening a holy war if we don't prove you're not a cosmic fraud, and the Palaxian High Council has declared Earth a sacred pilgrimage site. Great, Dexter muttered. He hadn't slept in 36 hours, and the observers were now constantly swarming around him, attempting to communicate with increasing urgency. No pressure. Olivia, who had somehow become his de facto handler, placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of him. The world's astronomers and physicists are working overtime trying to develop instruments that might detect these observers. So far, nothing. They wouldn't, Dexter said, rubbing his eyes. They're not entirely in our dimension. It's like he struggled to translate the concepts the observer had shared with him. They exist in a state of quantum superposition relative to our reality. Olivia stared at him. Since when do you understand quantum physics? Since an interdimensional jellyfish downloaded the secrets of the universe into my brain, Dexter replied, taking a grateful sip of coffee. The door opened and Ambassador Krelnik entered, flanked by two of the robed ecclesiasts and followed by what appeared to be a floating metal orb. The Galactic Council has reached a decision. Krelnik announced without preamble. Mr. Murphy must address the assembled representatives. Absolutely not, Dr. Reyes said firmly. He's a civilian, not a diplomat. The decision is not optional, one of the ecclesiasts intoned. The human who perceives the divine must explain this aberration. Meanwhile, the observer that had communicated with Dexter earlier, he'd started thinking of it as Bob for simplicity's sake, was frantically forming words in its luminous body again. Brain machine. Danger. Dexter's eyes narrowed, focusing on the floating metal orb behind the aliens. What's that device? Krelnik's compound eyes swiveled. A simple recording apparatus for your testimony. Eyes pulsed Bob the observer. Yeah, I don't think so, Dexter said, standing up. That's not a recording device. The observers are warning me about it. The ecclesiasts exchanged glances. The orb emitted a faint hum. This is blasphemy, the lead ecclesiast said. But Dexter noted a new emotion in its voice: fear. You cannot claim to know the will of the divine. Actually, I can, Dexter replied, surprised by his own boldness. And they're saying your little floating ball there is dangerous. So how about you tell us what it really is before I start describing exactly what the unseen ones are showing me about your real intentions? For a moment, nobody moved. Then the orb suddenly pulsed with energy and shot toward Dexter. Before anyone could react, the room filled with blinding light as dozens of observers converged on the orb, their bodies forming a barrier between it and Dexter. The orb froze in mid-air, suspended in a web of luminous tendrils visible only to him. Holy shit, Dexter breathed. What's happening? Olivia demanded, squinting at what to her appeared to be a mysteriously malfunctioning alien device. The lead ecclesiast had fallen to its knees, staring at the seemingly empty air where the observers clustered. The divine intercedes. It is true. Krelnik's antennae were flat against his head. The device was meant to scan his brain for deception. Nothing more. Eyes pulsed Bob and his fellow observers. The message was now so strong that for a moment, Dexter thought everyone might be able to see it. Extraction. Terminate. It was going to copy whatever makes me able to see them, and then kill me, wasn't it? Dexter said quietly. The silence that followed was all the confirmation he needed. Dr. Reyes stepped forward, her diplomatic facade cracking. I believe this meeting is over. General Harmon, please escort our guests back to their ship. As security personnel moved in, the ecclesiasts began making high-pitched keening sounds that Dexter somehow understood were prayers. The divine has chosen a human vessel, the lead ecclesiast wailed. The prophecies of the unseen reformation are coming to pass. Great, Dexter muttered to Olivia as the aliens were led away. I've accidentally become a prophet. Do you think that counts as a publication for my PhD? 3 weeks after first contact, Dexter found himself sitting in what had once been a storage closet in the Pentagon, but was now grandly labeled Bureau of Interdimensional Affairs. The room contained a desk, a coffee maker, and a whiteboard covered in Dexter's attempts to translate observer communication into something humans could understand. So let me get this straight, said General Harmon, who had somehow become one of Dexter's few allies in this mess. These observers have been guiding alien civilizations for millions of years, but they've mostly left humans alone because something about our brains makes us resistant to their influence. That's the simplified version, Dexter confirmed, pouring himself another cup of coffee. Bob the observer hovered nearby, occasionally forming words or images to help Dexter explain. They'd been trying to guide us, but we're unusually stubborn as a species. We ignore subtle nudges that other species pick up on instinctively. And now the entire galaxy is in an uproar because you can see them, Olivia added. She'd been taking meticulous notes on everything Dexter learned, already planning the series of groundbreaking papers they'd publish if they ever got clearance. The observers are fascinated by us, Dexter continued. They've been studying humans for centuries, trying to understand why we're different. Turns out, there's something unique about our neurological structure, a quirk that occasionally produces individuals like me who can perceive them directly. A quirk that the ecclesiasts wanted to extract from your brain, Dr. Reyes reminded him grimly. Dexter nodded. They saw it as a threat to their power. The observers have been using the ecclesiasts as their primary intermediaries, allowing them to interpret divine will for the masses. If regular people could see the observers directly, their religious authority would collapse, Olivia concluded. Exactly. But what they didn't count on was the observers themselves having opinions about that plan. Dexter gestured to where Bob was now doing what looked like an impatient loop around the ceiling light. They're not gods, not really. They're guardians, and they're far more interested in communication than worship. General Harmon rubbed his chin thoughtfully. So what happens now? We've got 17 alien species camped out in Earth orbit, half of them treating you like the second coming, and the other half wanting to dissect your brain. The observers have a proposal, Dexter said, watching as Bob spelled out words in pulses of light. They want to establish direct communication with humanity, using people like me as translators. They believe there are others, at least a few thousand humans worldwide, with varying degrees of ability to perceive them. A diplomatic corps as psychic translators, Dr. Reyes mused. It would certainly give us leverage in galactic politics and revolutionize every field of science, Olivia added, her eyes gleaming with academic excitement. Bob pulsed urgently, forming new words. They're also warning us. Dexter translated. The Galactic Confederation isn't as unified as they pretend. Some species are alarmed by the idea of humans with our independent streak gaining direct access to observer knowledge. So we're looking at potential conflict, General Harmon said, straightening. Wonderful. Not necessarily, Dexter replied. The observers have been mediating interspecies disputes for millennia. They're pretty good at it. But they need our help, our unique human perspective, to find solutions that work for everyone. As if on cue, an aide rushed into the room. Sir, we've got a situation. The Palaxian delegation is demanding an audience with the seer immediately. They say it's urgent. Dexter sighed and stood up. Duty calls, I guess. As they walked toward the diplomatic conference room, Olivia leaned in close. Did you ever imagine when you were staring through your telescope that you'd end up as an ambassador to both aliens and their gods? Honestly, I just wanted to finish my dissertation, Dexter replied with a wry smile. But I guess first human to communicate with interdimensional entities looks better on a resume than PhD in astronomy. Bob the observer swirled around them playfully, spelling out what Dexter had come to recognize as the observer equivalent of laughter. As they entered the conference room filled with diplomats from a dozen worlds, Dexter felt a strange new confidence. The universe was infinitely more complex and weird than humanity had ever imagined. But somehow, ironically, it was humanity's stubborn independence, our refusal to be quietly guided, that might make us the perfect bridge between the seen and unseen realms of existence. All right, Dexter said to the assembled aliens, gesturing to the empty air where a cluster of observers hovered. They're ready to talk if you are. And somewhere in the vast cosmos, unnoticed by almost everyone, the observers collectively experienced what might be described as a celestial facepalm at the realization that after millions of years of subtle guidance, the species that would finally revolutionize galactic society was the one that had mostly ignored them all along.